So we're going to be in John 11 today. So if you have a Bible, you can open it up there. If you need a Bible, Eric's got you covered. And so you can just raise your hand. He'll hand you a Bible. If you don't have one of your own, then please keep this one. We'd love for you to have that. So as Carly was talking about and praying over, we're gonna hold a couple of things today. One is belief, and the other is grief, pain, difficulty that happens. And are those compatible? Are those able to be held at the same time? And the way that I've been thinking about it this week is there are these things called wedge issues, okay? Maybe you've heard of this before, but it's this idea that there is a thing that can divide people, that can wedge between people or groups of people, or maybe even yourself. And so I've been thinking about specifically this idea of belief in Jesus, belief in who he was and who he is, believing who he's going to be, believing that the resurrection actually happened, believing that miracles happen, that can be a wedge issue for a lot of people. Maybe it's a wedge issue for you. And then also there's this other piece of grief. How we're supposed to hold grief. What does grief even mean? Is it okay to grieve as a Christian? Aren't we supposed to just be happy and stuff because Jesus and all these different things? And so then when you start to think about the way that people put that on us, whether it's belief in Jesus or whether it's here's how you're supposed to grieve. Here's your process. Hey, I know there's all these stages of grief. And I mean, come on, you should be in stage 3 by now. And all of these different pieces, right? And so there are these wedge issues that we want to talk about today. And the way that I want to do it is by framing out what I believe that Jesus is somewhat doing in how he interfaces with each one of the constituencies in the passage. So we're going to basically work through all of John 11 to be able to look at belief, grief, and how Jesus gets to interface with all these groups. So chapter 11, verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No. It's going to be for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and his sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And then he said to the disciples, let's go back to Judea. There's some things here that we want to even frame out that John, the writer of this biography of Jesus, is setting up for us, even from just a literary standpoint. He wants to make sure that all of the readers know that Lazarus, Martha, Mary are loved by Jesus. There's this implied deep relationship that goes just past he kind of hung out with them or whatever. Some people even believe that when he was doing his ministry in Jerusalem, that he would stay in their home because it was about 1.5 miles or 2 miles from Jerusalem. So there's deep relationship that John wants us to know, but he also wants us to know that Lazarus is sick, that Jesus says death is not going to be the last word, and that he stays even after he hears what's going on. Now, John is really particular in this because just a few sentences, a few chapters before, Jesus heals someone who was blind. And so we already know that Jesus has power. There are ways that he can do things. And so if he can take someone who's never seen before and have them see, then what's a sickness? Jesus can take care of that. But instead he waits. He doesn't just wait a little while, he waits 2 days. But then very specifically, John lets us know that the reason that Jesus waits is so that the glory of God will be revealed. So there are different scholars that have different takes. It seems like that maybe the way that this could have worked was that he wasn't necessarily waiting for Lazarus to die, but that Lazarus had died and he was waiting to kind of fulfill a whole bunch of other stuff. So there's this way of going, hey, Mary and Martha send word to Jesus, but they're about a day away from where Jesus currently is ministering. And so the thought is potentially that Lazarus dies soon after the messenger leaves. Takes him a day to get there. Jesus finds out. He spends 2 days. doing the rest of the ministry that he had there. And then he spends a day to be able to get to Bethany, to be able to have this conversation, to have this healing moment. 4 days is going to come up in a minute, and it will be important. So verse 8, but Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, and you're going back? Now remember, Jesus is interfacing the disciples, and he's not just going, I know that you believe me, so let's go do a thing. He's saying, I know you believe me, and I want you to believe more. I want you to believe again. And so his interface with the disciples is, hey, let's go back to Jerusalem. Let's go back to that general area. And what we find out is that just in a chapter before, because of the healing that had happened, Jesus was actually threatened with stoning in almost his life. But I love what we see in verse 14. Lazarus is dead, but for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. There it is. Lazarus has died. I'm heading back. Death doesn't have the final say, which seems really confusing. It's like, he's dead, so what is Jesus talking about? And he's like, you're going to find out. And it's going to be another way that you get to believe. The disciples are invited in, not just to believe, but to believe again. In verse 16, I love the resolve. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, okay, let's also go that we may die with him. There's belief. These guys are bought in. They know who Jesus is. They know what he's up to. They know they just got run out of town and almost killed. And Thomas is like, well, I trust that guy. If he's going, then we're going. If it means we all die, I am in. I believe enough. And he's about to get more belief. So we move to the next character in this particular passage, Martha. Martha is someone that is deeply loved by Jesus. We've already seen that. And what I love about what Jesus does with Martha is something really different than he does with the disciples. The disciples are all about believe again, and they're all about like, hey, you're walking back into a dangerous space. But Martha is actually met in her pain with who Jesus actually is. Verse 17, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been put in the tomb for 4 days. Now, I mentioned that 4 days was significant. Remember, potentially a day to get to Jesus. He spends 2 days there, and he spends a day to get to Bethany, where this scene is happening. 4 days is really significant in a Jewish understanding, especially back in the time, because there was a belief that one's soul actually kind of hung out around the body for 3 days. Okay? And so people would actually put the person in the tomb, and then they would check back to just make sure that they hadn't come back alive. Because there was this understanding that they were only mostly dead for 3 days, but then on the 4th day, the body would start to decompose. And so everybody's like, well, now the body is like getting gross and it smells bad, so the soul is out for sure. So this idea of 4 days is really specific for Jesus. It's really specific for John. It's really specific for the disciples to go, remember, you're going to see the glory of God revealed. There is no disputing anybody has about Lazarus and whether or not he's dead or alive. Verse 18, now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews come to Mary and Martha to comfort them in their loss of their brother. John is foreshadowing what he's going to illustrate at the very end of the chapter. Remember, we're close to Jerusalem. They just got run out of town with threats on their life. And people from the surrounding area, which would probably have been Jerusalem, are now coming out, maybe because they know Mary, Martha, or Lazarus, or they know the whole family. And so they've come out to mourn alongside. Some of these people, it sure seems like, were participating, or at least were within earshot of all that was going on in Jerusalem just a little bit before. So now they come out, and John is saying, pay attention to the fact that it's not just family members, but it's people from Jerusalem. Verse 20, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you were here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know that he will rise again at the resurrection of the last day. And Jesus said to her, I'm the resurrection and life. No, the one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? So much theology, so much rich understanding of who Jesus is and how he interfaces with Martha in her pain. She comes to find Jesus distraught, most likely, extremely sorrowful, potentially even frustrated, disappointed. And she said, Jesus, I know who you are. I know what you're like. I've seen the miracles that you performed. If you would have been here, I know that you wouldn't have let Lazarus die. You love him. You love our family. How many times have you been to our house to eat? You love this guy, and I know that you could have done something. And Jesus says, yeah, you're right. Your brother's going to rise from the dead. And she's like, yeah, I know my theology. I know at the end of time, when the Messiah comes back to give all of his glory, that literally every dead person is going to rise up. I know all that. I understand that resurrection. But then Jesus doesn't just say that he is interested in resurrecting Lazarus from the dead. He says, it's me. Resurrection is not an act that Jesus just performs. Resurrection is his character. It's who he is. I am the resurrection in life. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. All of these are characteristics of who I am. And Martha, I know you're in pain. I see what's going on, and I am meeting your pain to go, do you believe? Do you believe? I know it's hard. I know it's painful. Do you believe that I'm a resurrection in life? And she's like, yes, Lord. I believe that you're the Messiah come from God who is come into this world. She gets it right, and there's more. It sure doesn't seem here in any way, shape, or form that she has an imagination that Jesus is going to do something right now. Lazarus is dead, and he's been dead 4 days. So we know he's like dead, right? And she has no creativity. She has no context for anything like this happening, specific to this gospel. Now, we know that Jesus raises a few more people from the dead, but John is very specific to not have anyone in this way that he's writing his gospel until right now. And we're going to talk about why that is at the very end, but he's very specific to go, there is something unique that I want you all to see about who Jesus is and what belief gets to look like. Before his death, pastor and just titan of the faith, Tim Keller participated in an interview where he talked about what he was learning about living and dying. He'd just been given a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer where there is no cure. And the doctor told him, you will die very soon. There's no cure, there's no treatment. We can give you what we have, but I'm telling you right now, your time is very short. And in this interview, he spoke about grappling with his impending death, and he decided that what he wanted to meditate on, what he wanted to spend a lot of time on, is Psalm 90. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. He receives a death diagnosis, and he starts to recognize that in his mortality, he needs to number his days. Keller credits cancer, and more specifically, facing his own mortality, as the catalyst for the transformation of his prayer life in the recent years that had led up to this moment. And this is what he says in the interview: I never want to go back to the prayer life that I had before cancer. How many of our story does that fit in with? When we're met with difficulty, when we're met with pain, when we're met with a diagnosis, does it change our prayer life? And are we able to say, I don't ever want that to happen? One of the things that Keller also said in this interview is that twice a day, he prayed that he would be fully healed. Even though he'd been given this diagnosis of death, he was like, no, I'm going to keep praying, but my prayer life is also richer. There's something else that Jesus is showing me to go, I am interfacing with you in your pain so that you can believe in me more. Tim Keller, do you believe? Tim Keller, do you believe that I'm the resurrection and the life? Do you believe that regardless of the answer specific to whether or not you're going to be healed, do you believe that there's more? Do you believe I'm more? Do you believe I have your goodness in mind? Keller was able to say yes. So Martha has this encounter with Jesus where Jesus meets her in her grief and says, do you believe in me? And she goes home. She tells Mary, the teacher is here, and he's asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet entered into the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary, again, these people from Jerusalem and the surrounding area, those that were with Mary in the house comforting her, noticed that she got up quickly and went out. They followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn there. John is letting us know right here that there were about to be a lot of people that were going to witness what was happening. This is about to be a wedge issue because there's a large group that is gathered. And so now we get to the interface that Jesus has with Mary. And it's similar, but it's different. Because literally, when Mary gets there, verse 32 tells us that when she reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. The exact words that come from her older sister just a few minutes before. Jesus, I believe that you can heal people. And if you had been here, things would have gone differently. This moment filled with disappointment, potentially, that Jesus wasn't there, coupled with a profound sadness of losing your brother. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews that had come along with her were also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit. He was troubled. This NIV translation of these words doesn't get at the whole picture. There are scholars that have been talking about this passage. It's not super easy to translate these words in this particular phrase. But one of the alternate translations that actually a lot of scholars believe is that this idea of being deeply moved in spirit and troubled was more likely that there was a core sadness that Jesus had that was working its way out, not in simply grief, but in rage. That somehow in this moment, when Mary falls at his feet and says, if you had been here, Lazarus, your friend that you love, would be around. In this moment, he is completely overwhelmed with sadness for her and for all the people weeping, and at the same time going, I hate death. This is not how it's supposed to be. And so we see in verse 34 of this combination of grief and rage. Jesus says, where have you laid him? Jesus now holding all of this in and now letting all of this out is ready to confront the last and the most insidious and the most vile enemy that we have as humanity, death. Death in this life, death permanently. And Jesus says, I am not having it. And then he's probably looking at his disciples, and maybe he's even saying, or maybe they're remembering, he just said with us earlier that death wasn't going to be the last that we know of Lazarus. What's about to happen? And it certainly seems that at this point, Jesus turns with a resolute heart, with a resolute mind that is filled with grief and anger to march to the tomb. And on the way, it says that Jesus wept, crying for his dear friends and their pain, crying because of the rage that death is a reality for humanity. Mirroring everything that's around him, not simply just going, hey, you guys chill out, like it's going to be fine. I'm about to do a thing. But being in it with him, like actually processing it, being so sad and so frustrated that pain is in the world, that we have to live with it as human beings. Joseph Bailey wrote a book called A View from a Hearse in 1960s. He wrote this book after 3 of his 7 children had died. He was at a funeral of one of his children, and a friend sat down next to him and said, I know the Lord's working in this. I'm praying for you. I know that all these things work together for good. And we just don't understand his ways sometimes. We really have to trust him. He's compassionate. It's so hard, but we really can trust him. And Joseph Bailey wrote in his book that he could not wait for this man to leave. And then he goes on to write that another friend came by sat down next to him, and he never said a word. And when he did say words, his words were economical. And basically, they followed my lead and just showed a tremendous amount of support. And Joseph went on to write, I hated to see this man go. Jesus himself is not interested in simply offering platitudes about who he is and what he's like. He is not interested in just kind of giving some rote phrase about even what his Father is like, or even saying these grandiose things of that he's the resurrection. He's in it with us. He wants to come alongside us and just be able to sit, to just be able to lament, to be able to mourn that things are wrong, that this world is busted up. And to participate in it is just to be a part of a busted up space where people are going to hurt people, where the world is just going to be undone, where diagnoses are going to happen, where frayed relationships are part of the deal. And Jesus says, I'm so sorry. And weeps over it. And is angry about it. Janet and I are going to be in Dallas at the end of this week. And we've been invited to be with our brothers and sisters in Christ who are Persian and who both live in the United States, live abroad, and also those who live in Iran. I don't know if you've been following what's going on in Iran right now, but the government is killing people in horrible ways, in record numbers. We have some Persian friends, and one of them was telling us a story specifically about some of the family members that have been killed in this. And they said that the government is killing people. They're killing people and then bringing them back to their home to deliver to their family, not only to say, if you resist, this is what's going to happen to you, but then extorted them out of money to pay for the bullets that killed their family member. This is what's going on. And we're going to this conference to be able to hear what's going on because the Iranian church is vibrant. The Iranian church is actually flourishing even in the midst of all this. There are things that are going on in refugee camps in Turkey and in Afghanistan that have already blown my mind in just a little bit that I've been able to understand. But I love the fact that when we get to this conference to talk about how incredible Jesus is, to talk about how the church is flourishing in all these spaces, the first part of the conference is lament. There is a block of time, hours set aside to get together and just go, this is horrible. Jesus doesn't want us to simply just push aside pain and grief and go, dude, just like, would you move through the stages of grief already? Like, I'm the guy. He laments with us, and he invites us into that. And Oak House is a church that does this. We want to participate with you in your grief. And that can sound really morbid and weird for those of you who maybe haven't participated in something like that before. But it's an opportunity for us to not do this alone. Grief is already hard enough. To do it by yourself is never what God intended. It gets to be part of what we do together as a collective to go, I will sit with you and I'll remind you that this is not right. And somehow, when it's time, I want to remind you of who we serve. I want to remind you of who it is that gets to be another participant in grief. One who's beat hell, one who's beat death, one who's beat it all. And so we hold belief and grief together. Now Jesus is going to engage the crowd. And the way that he's going to engage the crowd is unique. Every one of these people have been met with exactly what they needed. Jesus, again, is not interested in just a bunch of canned responses, but he sees his disciples. He sees Martha. He sees Mary. He sees the wailing crowd around him, and he interfaces with each one of them exactly with what they need. I am so thankful that our God that we serve and our God who is Lord of all creation is a dynamic God and interested in the way I need it right now, in the way that you need it right now. Our conversations get to be really different, and that's the beauty of who God is. And so with the crowd, Jesus engages them with his authority, even his authority over death itself. Verse 36, then the Jews said, look at this man, how he loved them. And some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept him from dying? They're walking with Jesus, and Jesus is crying, and they actually feel sorry for him. They're like, man, you can really see that this dude loved Lazarus. Man, it sure seems like he's got stuff that he could have done about it. It's such a bummer that he wasn't here when he was sick, so that maybe he could have done something. Jesus, again, in verse 38, once more deeply moved, and it's that same term, grief and rage. He comes to the tomb. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, Martha, his sister, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is going to be a bad odor. He's been dead 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe that you're going to see the glory of God? Jesus reminds everyone of exactly who he is, and he's about to show them exactly what he's about. So they took away the stone. Jesus looks up to heaven and prays, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for their benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and his feet wrapped in strips of linen and the cloth around his face. And then Jesus said, take off the grave clothes and let him go. I actually thought about preaching the whole sermon just on that one sentence, because that'll preach, y'all. How many of us are currently wearing grave clothes as followers, as people who have actually been reborn? We're holding on to pain. We're holding on to anger. We're holding on to disappointment. We're holding on to that email and being so angry with the person that sent it because, dude, they do not know what they're talking about. And we're walking around like these zombies with grave clothes on, with either not a recognition or not a willing to do anything about it, to take these grave clothes off and let's go. There's an opportunity for us to also hold belief and to hold grief and to sit with people when they are in mourning, when they are in these spaces, and sit with them and go, I want to be with you. And then when we're ready, when God is up to something, let's start taking those grave clothes off. You're free. Be free. Lazarus walks out. And then we have no idea what happens. Is anybody frustrated with that? Are you kidding me, John? Like, dude, of all the things that I want to write down, I mean, just a chapter before, we have this guy, and this is a big deal, but I mean, it's like, he's never seen before, and now he sees, and we get like this whole thing, afterward of him going, he was called before different court systems, and they're like, dude, I'm just telling you, I was blind, and now I see, and all this stuff. Lazarus is raised from the dead, and we don't even get to talk to him. There's a dinner party in the next chapter where I'm sure he's just kicking it back. And he's like, yeah, well, I mean, when I was dead, but like, whatever. And it's like, John, could you not like throw us a bone? Like, did Lazarus get a book deal out of this? Like what was his podcast like? What was it named? And there's all these things where we just have no idea what's going on. And the longer that I sat in my frustration with this, it started to kind of dawn on me that actually isn't the point. I think a lot of times that we want to take a miracle, we want to take something that God has done in his extravagance, and we want to turn it into the thing. This is the thing. Oh, like he was raised from the dead. Let's get him a book deal. Let's get him a podcast. Let's have him tell his testimony from up front. And I'm not saying that none of that didn't happen, but when John is writing to readers who would read this 2 millennia later, while we're sitting at Oak House Church in Mission Viejo, California, that Lazarus wouldn't be the biggest deal in this passage. Come on. You guys, like, can we be a people, can we be a church where we see the magnificent works of God, where we are actually witnessing miracles, we're witnessing lives change, we're watching people forgive in radical ways, and go, but that's not the biggest deal. This is the 7th sign that John records. Now remember, I was talking about before that there have been other people that Jesus actually raised from the dead in the other biographies of Jesus. But one of the things that John has been doing from the very beginning is going, I want you to know who Jesus is. He's God. And I'm going to showcase that in several different ways. One of them is to tell you 7 incredible miracles that Jesus performs. Now, if you've been around church a little while or around the Bible a little while, you know that 7 is a really significant number. It's a number of completion. A lot of people who have studied this particular book have said that the first half up to this point in John's gospel, that this is called the book of signs. And now we're getting ready to move into a really different period that John is going to speak about. So John engages the crowd with his authority. Lazarus, come out. And John records that the biggest deal is Jesus. So now we move to the religious leaders and how Jesus wants to engage them. Jesus' power and his popularity force them to either believe or choose self-preservation. Remember, John has let us know multiple times that there are people coming from Jerusalem. There are people that are part of this that maybe were even part of some of the stuff that was going on specifically with the religious officials. Maybe they had a rock ready to stone Jesus. And some of them now have come out, and they are forced to choose between, do I believe what I just saw? And not only do I believe it, do I believe that that guy is something else, maybe who he says he is? Or am I not going to believe, or am I going to believe and not do anything about it? And so it sure seems like that some of them, whether they believed or not, go back to the religious leaders and say, this is what just happened. And now the religious leaders are confronted with the wedge issue of what do we do? They have this whole conversation about, well, I mean, if we do this, and what they come to is he's got to die. One of the fundamental reasons why we see that he has to die, even in this conversation that they have here, but then in other places, was self-preservation. They want to keep the status quo. They're in charge. They like it. They're decently wealthy. They like it. People are listening to them. They have authority, and they like it. And when confronted with the truth of who Jesus is, they are not interested in capitulating any piece of their life. He's got to die. Carly talked a few weeks back about this idea of when God does incredible things that we get a couple of options. It gets to be a wedge issue for us. Am I going to see what God's up to and then go, oh, God knows more than I do. He's bigger than me, and I need to take whatever misconceptions I have about what just happened, and I need to reform me to understand who God is better. Or we get the option to see a thing and then go, that doesn't fit my framework of the way the world works. That doesn't fit my framework for how to follow Jesus. That doesn't fit my framework for how it is that I'm supposed to respond to my wife. So I'm just going to move on from that part because I would rather stay in the status quo. I'd rather stay where I am. It's more convenient. It keeps me well fed. And so the confrontation that we see in John chapter 11, at least in part, is what do we do with belief in Jesus? And how do we hold grief at the same time? I was thinking about somebody in our church a long time ago, and he's been gone for a long time now. But this was, I don't know, it was more than 10 years ago. And he had just recently started coming, and there were some tragic things that were going on in his life. And he was just broken. He was a devastated man, and we would meet with him to talk and just counsel and encourage and sit with him and grieve alongside him. And for a long time, over a month, I remember, when we would get to response, he would come down to the carpet in front and wail. He would lay on his face and he would scream. You guys know how loud the music is. He was louder than that. And it made a lot of people really uncomfortable. But it was also a place where he felt safe enough to go, I got nothing and I'm going to scream about it. I am in such pain, I'm going to wail about it. I'm going to cry with the confidence that I know that people are going to come around me. And I'm not going to be made a fool of, but I'm actually going to be invited into deeper relationship. There's a lot of pain in this room, partly because there's a lot of us in this room, but also because I know some of you and where things are. I'm so sorry, like genuinely. And for those of you who I've been able to go to coffee with, we've been able to sit here, and I'm not trying to convince you of anything other than we're with you. We love you. We lament. I can remind you of things that are true about Jesus, but we're going to do that on your time frame. We're going to do that on God's time frame. And for some of you, I've sat with you to go, I kind of believe, I'm not sure I believe, or I believe some, but I want to believe more. And we've been able to lean into those conversations too. That can be a wedge issue for us. Is belief a wedge issue for you? Are you right now going, Jesus, I know who you are, I know what you're like, but... Or are you someone who is going, I can't reconcile how I feel with God being good? There is space for you here. We are interested in those conversations. We're interested for being in it with you. We're interested in going to coffee. We're interested in sitting in your home where it's the safest place that you have and praying with you and crying with you and mourning with you. We're interested in having any conversation about faith that you would want, where you're frustrated, where you look at people who claim to have belief in Jesus, but don't seem to be doing any of the things that Jesus did or said. And living in that tension, we want to be there with you and go, yeah, let's look to Jesus. There's a lot of people that are making a lot of mistakes, us included, but let's keep looking to Jesus. And so what we get to do right now is we get to respond. So I'll invite the band up. We're going to sing. And we're also just going to use this as a time for you to be able to have the conversation that God's already been having with you. Since way before you got in this room, way before I got up here and started talking. What's God want to keep saying to you? How can you keep listening to what God has for you? Does he just want to say, I'm so sorry. I've been there and I've been in it. And I'm not going to try and explain it away, but I'm going to interface with you and your pain right now. Or does he want to say, I am so proud you're here, even though you don't believe. I'm so glad that you're asking these giant questions because your belief is being shaken by what you don't understand in the world. Or by people that are frustrating you because it just seems like we're doing this thing differently. I see you. I want to be in it. We have a prayer team that would love to be an advocate of Jesus in that space. And so they're going to be standing over here. So if during any of this time you want to just go get prayer or just talk about stuff, that's great. If you don't want to say anything at all, that's totally fine too. We can just be with you and be next to you and be a hand on your shoulder. So whatever worship gets to look like for you right now, however it is that you want to respond to what God is already up to, through the passage or through something else, let's lean in. God, we're grateful for worship. The worship of pain and letting you know how much it hurts. The worship of confusion where we're going, God, help. The worship of singing. The worship of just listening to you. And so we pray in all of these ways that we're about to worship that we would do it in spirit and truth. Holy Spirit, lead us now. We'll do everything that we can to follow well.